1, 2. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Are you happy with audio, guys? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Are you happy with audio? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Ben, you happy? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for coming here today. In the referendum, 3.5 years ago, people voted for change. They wanted to change the way that we were told what to do by unelected bureaucrats in Brussels. They wanted to change our immigration system and take back control of our borders. They wanted to change the fact that we sent the EU £350 million a week gross, rather than spending that money on our priorities, like the NHS. And they wanted change because the status quo was not working for them. The referendum didn't create division in society, it revealed it. Divisions between North and South, rich and poor, young and old, which politicians of all parties had failed to address for too long. Across the country, there were overlooked families and undervalued communities who believed the system was not working in their best interests. While some, particularly in London and the South East, had reaped the benefits of economic growth, other parts of the country were left behind. Rather than bring prosperity to these communities, globalisation had seemed to hollow them out. Ageing infrastructure, low-wage jobs, poor public services, fading high streets. These were common features of many of the places which voted to leave. The referendum was a chance for their voices to be heard and their concerns listened to. Far from helping these communities, the EU seemed a distant institution, deaf to their concerns. When it came to the free movement of people or the bureaucracy imposed on UK industries, the EU seemed actively to work against their interests. They were right, which is why Gisela, Boris and I campaigned on their behalves. And it's why the three of us are back here today. People voted for change. But 3.5 years on, that change has still not been delivered. Politicians have failed to honour the biggest vote for change ever seen in this country. That, sadly, will forever be a stain on the last Parliament, and it should prod the conscience of the next. People are fed up with the stagnation of the last 3 years, and the grave risk at this election is that there is another hung Parliament, meaning more dither, delay and deadlock. Now, every independent commentator agrees the Conservative Party is the only party capable of winning a majority at this election. And as the distinguished pollster Professor John Curtis has said, it's a pretty binary contest. Either Boris gets a majority and we're leaving the EU on the terms that he's negotiated, or we get a hung Parliament. The only way that Jeremy Corbyn can get to Downing Street is to form an alliance with Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP. And she has named the price of her support next year. Another referendum on Scottish independence in 2020. So, instead of delivering the change that people are crying out for, a Corbyn-Sturgeon alliance would waste 2020 on 2 referendums. And on Brexit, Jeremy Corbyn won't even tell us how he would eventually vote in his own referendum. He'd ask the public to troop into the polling booths in order to choose between Remain and whatever deal he'd negotiated, while he put his feet up in Downing Street. If he can't even decide whether we should remain or leave, how can we possibly trust him to take critical decisions on behalf of the country? He would abdicate his duty and run away from his responsibilities. He is totally unfit to run this country. And in wasting the country's time on referendums, he would not deliver the change that people voted for. And that's why a vote for any party other than the Conservatives is, in effect, a vote for another hung Parliament, a vote for more dither and delay, a vote for a Corbyn-Sturgeon alliance, a vote for 2 more referendums next year. Put simply, a vote for any party other than the Conservatives is a vote against change. Now I'll hand over to Gisela to say a little bit more about why Jeremy Corbyn cannot be trusted to deliver the change that people need. Gisela.
Thank you, Michael. As a Labour MP, I was chair of the Vote Leave campaign, which brought together not only the 3 of us, but also volunteers and supporters from nearly all the political parties. In the referendum campaign, Vote Leave promised that a vote to leave would see us take back control for our laws, borders, money and trade. That was 3.5 years ago, and all this should of course have happened by now. But Brexit has not happened, because Labour, the Lib Dems and others have done everything they can to frustrate, delay and overturn the referendum result. Labour have voted twice to delay Brexit. The Labour leadership, the shadow cabinet and most Labour MPs do not believe in Brexit. And Labour's proposed Brexit deal is so bad that not even Jeremy Corbyn can bring himself to support it. So that means Leave voters have a clear choice at this election. Put Brexit at risk with Jeremy Corbyn, or get Brexit done with Boris Johnson. And we must get Brexit done. There's too much at stake. So we need to get on with it, so we can start to rebalance our country, so that counties, towns, villages away from London have a greater voice and are no longer ignored, so that we can strengthen and modernise our health service, give our children and grandchildren the education and training they need, and get on with building the strong economy we need if we are to meet the urgent challenges of climate change and invest in the renewal that our country needs. I became a Labour MP in 1997 in the landslide which saw Tony Blair become Prime Minister. And I was lucky enough to represent some of the most resilient, generous and fair-minded people in the country, and to serve in a Labour government as a minister during a time of optimism of what Labour could do and bring about. For many, Labour represented the hope of a better and fairer Britain, and one that could thrive economically and restore a sense of pride. But that has changed. I am devastated by the rise of anti-Jewish racism within the Labour Party and the abandonment of the kind of moderate, pragmatic and fair-minded politics which has been the characteristic of Labour in all my political life. I still think myself as Labour. I still hold Labour values. But whilst my values have not changed, the same can't be said for Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party. This is no longer the Labour Party that I and many thousands have joined. The Labour Party of John Smith, Gordon Brown and Tony Blair has gone, at least for now. And I know that for many, supporting Labour is part of a family tradition. They will feel, as I do, that they face a difficult choice. They're torn between loyalty to their party and the best interests of the country as a whole. And I say to these traditional Labour voters, who 3.5 years ago voted to leave, that we can bring the country back together again. And we can unite. But that is not by voting for Jeremy Corbyn. I started these remarks by saying the vote leave was a cross-party endeavour, and I believe that this election we need to come together again once more. Set aside party allegiance to get Brexit done and heal the country. In this election, I will not vote for Jeremy Corbyn, but I can vote for Brexit. This is, after all, the Brexit election. And a vote for Boris Johnson this time round is a vote to get Brexit done. But let me be clear. Voting for Brexit this time does not make me a Tory now or in the future. Rather, it is the best option for all those who, like me, still share Labour's traditional values, but who voted to leave, and they want a certainty, they want an end to stagnation, an end to division, and an end to delay. I urge other Leave voters across the country to join me in voting for Brexit once more by voting for Boris Johnson on December the 12th, so that we can finish the job we have started, so that we can get Brexit done and that we can take back control. Thank you.
Thank you, Gisela, and thank you, Michael. As Gisela and Michael have said, we came together to campaign to leave the EU because we shared a vision for this country, and we believe that this is a great country that could achieve so much more if it was freed from the shackles of the EU. And we also agreed that too many in our country felt powerless and left behind and wanted more control over their lives. We agreed that Brexit was a chance to change Britain for the better. And so it's been incredibly frustrating, and frustrating for the 17.4 million people who voted leave, that change has been delayed, diluted, denied. And that's why we had to have this election in order to break the deadlock in Parliament, that broken Parliament over there. And now we have an opportunity to make a decisive break with the dither and indecision of the last 3.5 years, but only so long as people vote Conservative. If there is another hung parliament after this election, then the deadlock will continue. The probability is that Jeremy Corbyn will be in Downing Street, propped up by Nicola Sturgeon. Gisela and Michael have powerfully set out what a disastrous prospect that would be. But if there's a Conservative majority government, we can deliver the change that people voted for. And how? By getting Brexit done and unleashing Britain's potential. Our first move will be to bring the withdrawal agreement bill back before Christmas and then leave the EU on the 31st of January. No ifs, no buts, we'll get it done. I have total confidence that we will do it because every single Conservative candidate at this election has personally pledged to their prospective constituents that they will back my deal. It's a deal that allows us to take back control of immigration, introduce an Australian-style points-based system, improve our border security. It's a deal that stops ongoing contributions to the EU budget and lets us redirect funding to domestic priorities. It's a deal that means we can get rid of EU rules and regulations that have often held us back. And when we get that deal through, we can finally move on as a country and realise the opportunities of Brexit. And today we're setting out some of the specific ways in which we will change EU law so as to enjoy the benefits of Brexit without delay. We will back British business by ensuring that the public sector buys British. We'll scrap the tampon tax. We'll back British industry by making sure we can intervene when great British businesses are struggling. And these are some of the benefits which will directly result from leaving the EU. In addition, we will also take steps to ensure that the Australian-style points-based immigration system is in place by the 1st of January 2021. And by lowering the number of unskilled immigrants who have been able to come here with no job lined up, the system will remove a major force that puts a downward pressure on wages. Getting Brexit done will enable us to deliver change more widely across the country. We can get on with investing in the NHS, recruiting 50,000 more nurses, delivering 50 million more GP surgery appointments, securing the equipment and the drugs we need to keep people safe and well. We can invest in schools, ending unfair funding differences by increasing the minimum amount of funding per pupil to £4,000 in primary schools, £5,000 in secondary schools. We'll crack down on crime by putting 20,000 more police officers on our streets and introducing tougher sentences for the worst offenders. We'll help the high street by cutting business rates and investing in local places and communities. And we can do all this in our transformative manifesto without raising income tax, national insurance or VAT. And no other party can deliver change at this election because every other party would be stuck in that self-same hung, broken parliament, arguing amongst themselves about Brexit, which is why the only way to secure change at this election is with the Conservative Party. And if we do this, we will at last be able to lift ourselves out of the present morass and go forward with confidence. We are a great country and we can be greater still. We'll make Britain the best place in the world to live, to raise a family, to grow up, to see your grandchildren grow up. The best place to start and grow a business. The best place for education, innovation and science. We'll deliver an NHS which looks after us when we are sick and brings us back to health. Schools which give our children the start they deserve in life. An effective crime-fighting strategy. Control of our immigration to secure our borders. A clean and green environment that we can hand on to the next generation. A country that is more united, more confident, with opportunity spread across the whole of the UK so that we can unleash the potential of the whole of the country. And that is the change that people voted for in 2016, and it's high time that we delivered it. Thank you all very much.
Thank you all very much for coming here. There's time for some questions, we've got representatives from lots of organisations, but I think we'll start with John Pienaar from the BBC.
Prime Minister, you said that you believe that pledge. Would you be personally happy to take responsibility for any damage or harm to the British economy that flows from leaving with no deal? If I could add this, you say there'd be faster, easier intervention for ailing businesses outside the European Union. Does that mean more intervention? Would you be a more interventionist Conservative government? And if I may just add very briefly, John McDonnell has said you are running scared of the series of interviews with Andrew Neil. Are you?
On your last point first, John, here I am submitting happily, joyfully to your interrogation, and there could be no more fearsome interviewer than yourself, and I'm happy to answer your more substantive points by saying that, look, I'm very confident that we can get a deal with our friends and partners, a new free trade agreement by the end of next year. And the reason for that is we've got a fantastic deal done in 3 months when people thought it was impossible. Remember, they said we couldn't reopen the withdrawal agreement. We did. And the advantage that we have, as you know, in doing that deal is that we are in a state of grace with the EU at the moment, in the sense that we have complete alignment in so far as our regulations go. We have a zero tariff, zero quota arrangements already. There's never been a negotiation between trading partners that began with the two sides already in that state of harmony. So I'm full of optimism and confidence, and suggest that everybody else should be as well. We'll get it done and we'll move on. And on state aids, I mean, I'm not in favour of distorting competition. I don't want to see unfair practices introduced. I want to see I want to see a level playing field. But when I look sometimes at what OJU rules have meant for UK companies, and I just saw examples the other day up in Teesside of how fantastic British business was finding it very difficult to develop our potential in wind turbine technology because of OJU rules. There are ways in which we will be able to do things differently and better. And on state aid, so you might like to know, John, the ramifications of EU state aid rules are felt everywhere. And I talked to companies that are local government or schools that are trying, for instance, to run bus services where they take in some contribution from the passengers. What they find is that they fall foul of state aid rules insofar as they may be deemed, therefore, to be competing with private hire vehicles or private bus companies of one kind or another. So that, buses taking kids to school or helping to move disadvantaged people around the community are facing real difficulties because of some EU state aid rules. What we will be able to do is be more flexible, be more pragmatic, but also maintain a level playing field.
Thank you very much. And Beth Rigby from Sky News.
Prime Minister, a couple of things just to follow up from John. Just to be clear, if you don't get a deal by the end of 2020, and I know you're confident you will, but if you don't, are we still leaving with no deal if necessary? That's my first question. Just on a follow-up on the tampon tax. You say that you're going to scrap this as a benefit of Brexit, that you're backing women. But what about women who are single mums? As a younger man, you describe children of single mums as ill-raised, ignorant, aggressive and illegitimate. That's how you've described millions of your own citizens. How can they vote for you if that's what you think of them? Thank you.
Well, Beth, as I've said before, millions of words that I've written, you'll find everybody is able to find some that they can cull from the text and twist them and distort them in whatever way that they choose. Actually, on the substantive point that you raise, of course we have a massive opportunity, and yes, of course we will be doing things to cut VAT on sanitary products. Quite right. Why not? We should be. It's a freedom that this country will have. We'll be able to do free ports. We'll do loads of things differently and better. And I think the question I would really like people to focus on is this fabled New Deal that only Jeremy Corbyn backs, except he doesn't back it, that he wants to do. What single new freedom or opportunity would it give the UK even if he were able to secure that deal from Brussels? It's not at all clear to me that he'd be able to do any. He wouldn't take back control of our tariffs. He wouldn't take back control of our laws. He wouldn't take back control of our VAT. He certainly wouldn't be taking back control of our immigration policy. And yet this is the deal that is supposed to be put to the British people as the Leave offering in his referendum next year. I mean, the whole thing is utterly preposterous. We have a great deal. It allows us to come out on January the 31st. It does what people wanted. It allows us to deliver Brexit, and we're going to deliver it.
But will you leave with no deal if you can't get a trade
Well,
deal done
people,
by the end of December?
we will look at the situation that we're in. As I said just now to John, we are in a fantastic situation. I have every confidence that we'll be able to do a great deal, a great free trade deal, not just with the EU, but with countries around the world. And we will begin straight away on January the 31st. And as I say, we have the advantage, not only that we're already in a state of harmony with the EU, but also that our friends in the EU have a very considerable trade balance surplus with us in goods of 65 billion pounds, and they have every incentive to get on with it.
And Paul Brand from ITV.
Thank you. Thank you. Since you last stood together on the morning after the referendum, you've blamed pretty much everyone for the failure to deliver Brexit, whether it's MPs, the courts, the EU, everyone that is, except for yourselves. Is any one of you willing to take responsibility for the fact that you started this project and you started it without a plan?
No, well, I'm certainly willing to take responsibility for the fact that we believe in. I'm sure. I mean, I'm let Michael and Gisela must speak for themselves, but I think it's a great project for this country, and it's a great shame that Parliament has impeded it for the last 3.5 years. I think it has corroded trust in democracy. If we want to get Brexit done, there's only one way forward, as Gisela has said, and that's to vote Conservative at this election. Gisela, why don't you?
I think one of the tragedies is that the alternative versions to us leaving aren't actually alternatives. They're just variation of Remain. And if I look at what, at the moment, the Labour Party, to my great regret, portrays as being options being offered, it's just various options of staying in. And we had a referendum. Voters were told that it's a once in a generation. They were told by the then Prime Minister, whatever you decide, I will do. And then we had 3.5 years of variations on the theme of how can we stop it. And I think now is the one and only chance. And this is a really, really important thing. If we don't get this over the hurdle now and get it delivered, Brexit will not happen. Let's be clear about that.
Gisela and Boris are absolutely right. I take full responsibility for all of my actions, but so should all of those MPs in the House of Commons who stood on manifestos saying that they would deliver Brexit and then, when they were elected, did everything possible to frustrate it. Boris, as Prime Minister and as Foreign Secretary, has done everything he can to get us out of the European Union. But there are people, some of whom stood as Conservatives, many of whom stood as Labour candidates, who said to the people, yep, you voted to leave, I will honour that vote. They did not. The only way that we can get Brexit done is by making sure that we have a working Conservative majority to get Parliament working again. Now, we'll take, because we want to take as many questions as possible, we'll take a group. So we'll take Francis from the Times, Dennis from the Irish Times, and Harry from the Mail on Sunday. Francis.
Mr. Johnson, Mr. Johnson, Francis from the Times. I've read that 1995 Spectator column very carefully, several times. Have your views changed about single mothers and their children? And secondly, will state aid rules be, the new state aid freedoms, be devolved? Can the Scottish Government also take the same freedoms to intervene on failing companies that you want to?
Yes.
Dennis Staunton from the Irish Times. Prime Minister, you said you want a level playing field with the European Union, but the measures you're proposing on state aid and public procurement are the opposite of that. And the European Union has made very clear that they won't give you a zero tariff, zero quota trade deal if you diverge in ways like this. Why do you believe it's in your country's interest to put at risk that level of market access for the sake of these measures?
And Harry Cole.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Your government has begun the process of bringing children back from northern Syria, British citizens. Do you fully support this? Was last week's operation a one-off? And is it a price worth paying to open a legal back door to ISIS fighters and their brides to possibly come back to the UK as a result of your actions?
Yeah. Thanks very much. Francis, on my previous articles, I've said a lot about that over the course of the last few weeks, and I just repeat my point. You know, you can always find bits and pieces that seem to mean one thing. In fact, almost invariably, that the article in question is saying something very different. And on your point about competition, will it be policy? Will it be devolved? State aids, will they be devolved? No, we believe that to be a national competence, and we'll be retaining that nationally. And on Dennis's very good point about how is that going to be compatible with a free trade deal, well, of course it's compatible, and were there to be any issues arising, then, as you know, under any big free trade deal, there's a joint committee to arbitrate on whether some unfair subsidy or dispensation has been made. But it would be a committee of sovereign equals, as I'm sure you understand, such as exists between the EU and Canada or whatever. And on Harry's point about the children from Daesh, look, this is a very, very difficult business because there are extremely difficult military and security issues that surround this whole question. There are also difficult questions about finding exactly which children might be eligible or capable of being brought back to this country. There's a very small number, we think, that do fall into that category, Harry, and we've done what we can to help in that small category. It's not a large category, but we're doing what we can.
Do we only have any representatives from Channel 4 here? Yes, OK. We'll take the gentleman from Channel 4, and then we'll also I can't see many female colleagues. Oh, yes, I can, Heather. So we'll take the gentleman from Channel 4, Heather from The Guardian, and then Sebastian Payne from the FT.
Hello, Prime Minister. Paul McNamara from Channel 4 News. Thank you for the question. You've just said that you have every confidence of getting a deal by the end of next deal, but your opponents say the threat of no deal is still very much on the table. So quite simply, yes or no, will you end no deal preparations? Will you end the vast sums that have been spent on no deal preparations?
Well,
can we take the
sorry.
Go on, sorry. And so next in line, Heather from The Guardian.
Hello. Is that working? Prime Minister, outside Downing Street, when you became Prime Minister, you said, we will fix the crisis in social care once and for all, and with a clear plan we have prepared to give every older person the dignity and security they deserve. 5 months later, you published your manifesto, which says you want to discuss the issue with Labour, which is not an approach you tend to take to other pressing political issues. Isn't that extraordinary political cowardice? And what do you say to those families who are facing these funding issues in social care now?
Thanks, Heather. And Sebastian Payne.
Hello, thank you. Sebastian Payne from the FT. Prime Minister, on these state aid policies you've announced today, some Brexiters talked about creating a Singapore-on-Thames, a kind of Thatcherite economy. This seems more a North Korea-style Brexit inspired by Jeremy Corbyn you're proposing here. What do you think the hardcore Thatcherites in your cabinet think about this? And also, your agreement as part of Northern Ireland locks that into EU state aid rules, so are you agreeing to have a bigger border down the Irish Sea now?
Dear Leader, your view.
Thank you very much. Thank you. On Paul's question about no deal preparations, actually I think they were thoroughly useful in many ways, but particularly useful in getting the deal that we eventually did, because I think it convinced the EU that we were in earnest about leaving. And many of those preparations will be extremely valuable as we come out of EU arrangements anyway. So I think that they're the right thing to have done and to keep in a state of readiness. But by the end of 2020, I'm also confident that we will have a great new FTA ready to go for the reasons that I've set out. And of course, the preparations will remain extant. There's no reason to dismantle them. We are coming out of the. Can I invite people not just to keep asking me supplementary questions while I'm trying to answer the next question? But as far as coming out of the EU goes, it will be necessary, obviously, to change our arrangements, our relationships, and a lot of the preparations that we have done, thanks very much to Michael in his role as Chancellor of Duchy of Lancaster over the last period, have been extremely valuable and will continue to be of value. Heather asked about the crisis in social care. It is a huge national crisis, as everybody knows. We're putting massive amounts more into the NHS. This is the biggest increase in funding in the NHS in modern memory. We're increasing funding of the NHS by about 29% from 2018 to 2023. This is huge sums going in, but it's the interface between people leaving hospital, social care, that is causing real problems. So what we've done is put £1.5 billion immediately. This new government, since I've been in, has put £1.5 billion into tackling social care, helping councils tackle social care. What we're saying is we'll put another £1 billion more every year of this Parliament into recruiting the staff, the carers that we need. And yes, you're right, Heather, that we're also reaching out across politics to try to take the division out of it, because I think there is a growing national consensus about the way forward, and it's based on, I think, two principles: that everybody should have dignity and security in their old age, and nobody should pay for the costs of their care by being forced to sell their home. And that cannot be repeated too much. Seb Payne asked a question about our approach to state aids, and I just want to repeat what I said. This is not going to be I believe in competition. I believe in a level playing field, but there are distortions sometimes introduced by the OJU processes, which are extremely bureaucratic and cumbersome. We may be able to speed things up, for instance, on planning processes, which would be a great benefit to the housing industry and many other parts of our economy. And I mentioned what may seem to some a relatively trivial issue, the issue of school buses and buses for the disabled, which suddenly seem to fall foul of EU state aid rules. There are going to be cases where a pragmatic approach that backs British companies, British businesses will be, British schools will be the way forward.
Do we have any colleagues here from the Scottish media? No? Okay. Oh, yes. We'll have, exactly. We'll have Andy Bell, Christopher Hope from the Telegraph, and, oh yes, Jason Groves from the Daily Mail, yes.
Thank you very much. Andy Bell, 5 News. Prime Minister, you said you think the institution of the monarchy is beyond reproach. Do you still think that?
Okay, Christopher?
Chris Hope, Telegraph. Prime Minister, 2 quick questions. Theresa May hid from scrutiny in 2017, and that didn't end very well for her. Why are you hiding from Andrew Neil? And also, on behalf of Tory members, you haven't been asked yet about this. Why do you want to give MPs a chance to repeal the fox hunting ban? Why do you want to give MPs a chance to repeal the fox hunting ban?
Right, and then Jason, sorry.
Thank you. Jason Groves from the Daily Mail. Your press release this morning says on state aid you want to make it faster and easier for the government to intervene to protect jobs when an industry is in trouble. Can you give us an example of a business in the last decade that's gone to the wall that you would have saved? And can I ask just quickly on what's happened to Jacob Rees-Mogg? He seems to have been exiled to a bunker in Somerset since making his comments on Grenfell. This morning you won't guarantee him in his job. Is it all over for Jacob?
Right. Okay. First, thanks very much. On Andy, the monarchy. The monarchy is the Queen. The monarchy is the Queen, and In my view, she is beyond reproach. There is a distinction between the monarchy and the royal family, and everybody will readily appreciate that. And on it's an obvious definitional distinction. On Christopher Hope's question about, look, there's going to be no change at all. That's clear from the manifesto on hunting, and we will use this manifesto on the. We will certainly not be, bringing back fox hunting. That's absolutely inconceivable. What we will do is use this manifesto, use the opportunities of Brexit to champion animal welfare, and we can do things differently. I don't know whether I feel, frankly, that it's barbaric that in this country people can eat legally. They can eat shark fin soup made from the fins of sharks that have been deprived of those fins while they're alive and then thrown back into the sea. And I think that should be banned. And you can't do it at the moment under EU single market law, no more than you can ban the shipment of live animals for long periods when they're often in great distress. And people have campaigned in this country to have the freedom to do that for decades, and we will now have that freedom. And I think that you should ask, again, I invite you to ask the Labour Party, ask Mr Corbyn and the Labour Party, what is their plan here? Because they would have none of, under the deals they propose, none of those freedoms would return to this country, even under the so-called Leave deal that they're advertising. And it's, in my view, a complete outrage. I think when people realise what is being proposed, they will be furious. And on Jason's point about various members of the cabinet, I think any commentary, any further commentary about that, Jason, would be rightly categorised by people as me being overconfident about this election, measuring up the curtains. This is going to be a very close-fought election. We're fighting for every vote, and Jacob Rees-Mogg and the rest of the cabinet, to the best of my knowledge, in very good health and fighting hard right now for re-election. And on the state aid point, have you got an example? Oh, sorry, I don't want to get into discussion of individual companies.
It wouldn't be fair on individual companies to look back retrospectively. And I think we'll have to take our final selection of 3 questions, and the 3 gentlemen right at the back, starting there. Yes.
Thank you very much. It's Matthew Holhouse from MLEX. Prime Minister, I want to ask about China and UK investment policy. Your manifesto says nothing about tightening up the rules on national security screening for foreign investment and takeovers. As you know, your predecessor was very keen on tightening this up, and the UK's allies around the world are tightening up their own investment screening. Can we conclude that you're fairly content with the regime as it is, or will you be making it a priority to review those takeover rules? Thank you.
Oh, yes.
Prime Minister, you've given very little detail about fuel duty, no mention in the manifesto. Can you reassure motorists they won't see the first rise in a decade? And just on national insurance, the tax cut you offered, how are you personally going to spend your £85 next year?
And yes, and gentleman just next to Matt.
Hi, Prime Minister. Emilio Casalico from Politico.eu. 3 quick questions. Firstly, will you meet Donald Trump when he comes to the UK next week, or are you worried that he might blow up your election campaign? Secondly, you said last night that you've never lied in your political career, but were you not sacked by Michael Howard in 2014 for lying about an extramarital affair that you had? And before you answer quickly, that's not about MPs delivering Brexit or Brexit. It's a question about your personal conduct. And thirdly, can you name one thing that you like and respect about Jeremy Corbyn?
Yeah. Okay. Barrel load of questions there. I'll hand over to Prime Minister in a second, but the one thing, just in response to Matthew's question, that I want to say is that it is the case that within the Cabinet Office there is a specific unit that looks at potential takeovers and screens them for security reasons. And I and the Cabinet Office Minister, Oliver Dowden, had undertaken to strengthen that unit and to strengthen protections in the future. But you'll appreciate, given the sensitivity of these cases, I can't say more than that. But we certainly don't believe that the current provisions which are in place are robust enough. And I'll hand over to the Prime Minister and to Gisela for the last words.
Just on that, I obviously think Michael is right. There is a balance to be struck between continuing to be open to investment from China, which I think is very important for this country, and we will continue to do that and to build a trading partnership with China. But clearly we can't do anything that prejudices our critical national infrastructure, our security, or do anything that would compromise our ability to cooperate with Five Eyes security partners. So those are the parameters. I'm very, very far from a Sinophobe. I want to have good relations with China, but there are clear difficulties and clear boundaries that we have to set. And on Matt's question, well, look, Matt, everybody in this country is going to get, or every taxpayer is going to get a tax cut. 31 million people will benefit from the cut in national insurance. We're also going to cut taxes on businesses, on SMEs. That's the right way forward. We are a tax-cutting government. We don't want to raise fuel duty. I have absolutely no intentions to raise fuel duty. And on Emilio, and by the way, I must miss the opportunity to contrast our approach with the catastrophic sledgehammer that Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party would take to the UK economy. And it would mean huge tax rises for working people. It would mean everybody paying £2,400 more in tax. His prospectus is economically ruinous. And the crucial thing is that, of course, it's not just the burden of taxation. It's what would happen to the interest rates that the market charges on this country's debts. And they would go up, and that would push up the burden of mortgages for everybody in the UK. It is not the right way forward. Never forget, every time Labour leave office, they leave the public finances in ruins. That's what they did last time, and they always leave unemployment higher than when they came in. And as I said before, the only difference between Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell is they propose to start with an economic crisis rather than end up with one. As for Emilio Casalicchio's question about NATO, I'm obviously going to be hosting the NATO leaders meeting and look forward to meeting all the NATO heads of government coming to that meeting. And on your point about trust, let me just repeat what I've said before. I do not set out to mislead the electorate in my policies, in what I set out to achieve. If you look at my record over the last 10 years, when I've set out to do something, I've gone at it with as much energy and determination and work as I can. Time and time again, we've not only delivered, but over-delivered. That's one of the reasons I'm so frustrated at the moment about what's happening with Brexit and with this Parliament. And I repeat, the single thing that has undermined and corroded trust in politics has been the failure over the last 3.5 years to deliver Brexit. We've got to get on and do it and take the country forward.
Thank you. Gisela, anything else you wanted to add?
I just want to reiterate that whilst quite a number of things have changed since in those 3.5 years since we last shared a podium and came together on a cross-party basis, but the one thing which hasn't changed is we still have not left the European Union. The only way to deliver Brexit is by now voting for Boris Johnson on the 12th of December, not because if you voted leave and you're a traditional Labour voter, you've suddenly become a Tory. That does not make you a Tory. What it does mean is if you voted leave and you want to deliver this, then that is the only way to produce a clear majority. And that's why we're here today, and do not lose sight of that basic message.
I want to thank you all for coming. I just want to stress that the Prime Minister has been on this platform now for more than 45 minutes. He's taken questions, more questions, I think, than any party leader has taken at any press conference during the course of this general election. I think so, yes, during the course of this general election campaign. And so the Prime Minister has a message which is clear, and it's one that has been underlined by Gisela. And I think Gisela's courage, as someone who is a lifelong Labour member, who's dedicated her life to the Labour Party, but who is first and foremost a Democrat, Gisela's courage and her public service is an example to us all. So thank you all very much. Thank you.
Get Brexit done.